The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to MergerWare's webinar, Are Your HR Practices M&A Ready? My name is Richard Martin. I'm going to act as your moderator today, and I welcome you to our webinar. Before we begin, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. So the first is we're going to be taking questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please register them in the chat window on your screen, and we will address them as time permits at the end of our session. The second item I want to mention is that throughout the presentation, we're going to be serving up a few survey questions. We'd like to get your opinions. And when you see those questions, again, please also register your opinions or answers in the chat window, and we will comment on those as time permits. Finally, at the end of the presentation, we will send you a recording of this webinar as well as a presentation, so you'll have all the information. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We're very happy to answer. And so now let me get into the presentation and first introduce our speaker, Philippe Bouchet, who is the CEO of VISIOM SAS. He's also a board member of MergerWare. Philippe has vast experience in M&A and partnerships as well as operations at some pretty major companies, and we're very lucky to have him today. So without further ado, Philippe, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Good morning or good evening to you, depending on what part of the world you are. My presentation today will be a practical session intended to show a few aspects that I've seen in my career, a few points that I think are critical in terms of HR in handling a merger, or that would help you on those at that time, very critical when you acquire or you're acquired by a company. I'm not coming from the HR side, but that precisely maybe why I've seen these things and discussing with the different HR organizations and seeing what have been their feelings and where they thought they could do better the time after. I'm starting with those two pictures, and you might recognize those two persons. In France, you would recognize them immediately. Might not be the case for you if you're in other parts of the world. On the left side, Louis Schweitzer was the chairman of Renault Group when he decided to invest in Nissan. That was 15 years ago. And at that time, Renault was investing, taking a major share in a Japanese manufacturer who had been was in a very difficult situation. The two companies were of an equal size, approximately, and Nissan was about to be bankrupted. General Motors had declined the opportunity of acquiring the company, and this was a huge risk for Renault. It was, a lot of things were at stake. It was the opportunity to be a world-size company, but also the risk of not being able to manage the activity. On the right side, Carlos Ghosn was the person that was designated and immediately after the investment sent to Tokyo to manage Nissan. You can see this. So this is not a picture. It's taken from a manga or an anime that was made in Japan. He spent a lot of time advertising about what he would do and communicating, not only inside, but also outside the company. Why I'm talking about that is that's the first thing that will come, and it's not necessarily in the agenda of HR per se, or in the HR manager agenda, but on the top of the list is the question about the top management of the company that will be acquired. Depending on the way you will integrate this company and depending on the strategic intent, what you want to do with it, you might keep it alone, fully integrated. There are diverse way of doing or integrating the company, but still there is one question: is what about the top management? Who will run the show during the merger and after the merger? And if you take a little bit of distance and think about the role of the CEO and the top management in the company, The role of the CEO is very important. He will incarnate the vision for the company. He will really drive the idea, the ambitions, the values of the company. It's really a lot of investment for him, personal timing, but also an extremely important relationship with the different employees, bottom to top of the company. The role of the top management around him are to support him in this effort and to bring the culture and drive their department, but not only driving their department, really being part of the top management is also supporting this CEO incarnation of the company. So there is one question that comes straight is, can this vision survive the acquisition? Can you be a CEO of a company and stay at your position after the acquisition? It might be the case, it might not be the case, depending on what you are doing, but the CEO is not just a manager, is something different, and you have to think about these questions. So this question of the mission of the top management and designation of the top managers will be one top priority during the merger. The top areas where you will have to focus beside the CEO would be, in general, finance and HR. I mean, if you are with finance and HR, if you have to choose inside the top management, what are the areas that are critical and where are potentially the biggest mistakes, you are not totally done with those three positions, but at least you are able to see and monitor what is happening in the company if you have clearly decided of those three positions, CEO, finance, and HR. Doesn't mean they are the only one important, but that they are the ones that are giving you the view on what is happening in the company. And that's the ones that will be in contact throughout all the organization in the company, very transversal way, and will be able to monitor what is happening in the company after when the merger is announced. We have here one question. I will pause the first time for the first question. And the question is, do you have a dedicated HR leaders assigned to the integration team in your practice, in your company, in the organization? So I would let you then communicate through the chat, as Richard mentioned, your feedback. I will just pause a few seconds for that. Okay, so I guess we had a few answers, and we'll come back about it a little bit later. But it seems that the feedback is mixed, and this is something that obviously depicts the situation in many companies. One interesting thing was a survey that was made a few years ago during a post-merger integration conference. And the attendees were asked about the functionalities and the capabilities that should be strengthened in the company to go after a merger, and in the next merger, what should be better organized in terms of departments. So sales and marketing comes first, but what not so many people mention in debriefing this survey is that human resources are coming second. 20% of the attendees were saying, well, we could do better in human resources management. And that's something that should just bring our attention in general. So we mentioned that we would talk about readiness during this seminar. What I mean readiness is, how do we get the human resources ready for acquisition? And one thing I like to show in general is to make a comparison with the finance department. Usually finance departments are well prepared for acquisitions, for mergers. They are people that are specialists in finance, in structuring deals. They have external consultants. They are working with boutiques regularly. They have ideas on how they should manage the share pricing and the owner's reward for being in a good shape for going into an acquisition. You usually need to have already good results and good share and a good rating for the financial market to go aggressively for acquisition. They are regularly communicating to analysts and shareholders. And for that, they have guidelines and they're used to do it. HR, if we go to the same line, we need to similarly build a number of things and capabilities, skills, but also tools so that they are ready for acquisition and for the merger. They need to have clear pictures already on the existing company on how they are developing careers, who they are. Many companies are doing that, but then they're not necessarily doing or linking that to the merger aspect of their activity. They have also to think about talent pool. So that's a few things that seems when we compare those two departments very obvious, but that are not necessarily always enforced. When we think about the organization of the company, we talked about the top management a little bit earlier, but if we look just a little bit under the top management, we are seeing a lot of people that are in the middle management that are key for the company. If you want somebody who knows the product, well, the product managers know the product. They know the competitions, activity, they know the legal requirements, certifications, what you have to do, the key accounts. They have a regular interaction with your best customers. They have pricing strategies for your products. The team manager, the support manager are key elements for your activity. And when you go into those people, you realize that they are really key to your operations. And if you have decided what you will do with the top management, and unless the top management that are really incarnating the vision, they are really the operational guys on the field. They are the ones that will help you going through this transition in the merger of the company. And that's an area of attention where you need to be careful on making sure that, well, not only those people stay on board, but that you know what you are asking from them and that they know why this acquisition, this merger, what it means for them. Not knowing that is a formidable stress for the middle management, especially when top management has not been decided. And to go into that, you have to imagine what, and I think we have seen that in many cases in our experience, what happens the day the merger is announced. Well, as soon as the deal is announced, you will see that there are a number of confrontations, of fighting, of concerns between the executives and the managers. And you are immediately entering in a broad area where what was apparently simple before the merger suddenly becomes complicated because the different departments are moving. People are trying to align what they think would be either the interest of the company or their interest or the interest of the department. And the risk is about cultural clash, is about uncertainty to be paralyzed. It's about seeing key employees leaving for other companies or even for the competition. And the moral is something that is always important in a company. If that's the middle management that can be affected when this, I call it the hurricane comes, and when the merger is announced. And these parts of the merger is well known. But what do we do about it? The first thing is that I'm not sure we are always taking into account what is the general thinking of the employees before the merger. And this poll was a very interesting one, where they asked to a number of employees of the industry in general, what were their impression or their experience of merger? Was it positive? Was it negative? Or unknown? And it's interesting to see the results of this poll. Only 7% are saying no, meaning nothing to, there is no plan, or I've not been through a merger. 40% are saying they will go, probably, or they fear or they expect that their employers will go through an M&A process. And on the other half of the people that were interviewed, we can say that well, more than 80% of them, that means difficult experience of previous M&A or mergers in their working life. That's the general thoughts of the employees that you will have to face when you go into a merger. Very often it's not that it's unknown, but we don't see things really anticipating that, so that it can be taken from the beginning of the merger and tackled as a priority. People are worrying about what will happen with the company. I will here pause again, and we'll see a question 2. I will let you read it and take your time to say if you think that's organization or this statement is for you think very important, not important, or if you don't know. Okay, so as this session is a practical one, I was on a rolling path, go through and take the takeouts from as they come. So we mentioned at the very beginning, and we saw in the example, that the decision on who the top management will be is critical and helps fixing the middle management, and should be done ideally before the announcement. One of the consequences of this is that if you want to have the choice, and if you want really to decide on what you will do with the top management, if you keep people on board, if you bring a few more people on board because you've detected some skills, added skills that are needed, you need to have prepared that in advance and probably build a talent pool strategy in your approach. That's something that was really embedded in the human resources approach in one of the first company I collaborated in Philippe Bouchet, that is serial acquirer, if we say, that really defined the role of the human resources. Top role of the human resources was to recruit and grow the top management of tomorrow. They were hiring typically fresh outs with the idea of having them and detecting in these pools the one that would be the head of divisions, of businesses, or the acquired companies in the future. It's in the case we were mentioning in Nissan, there was one person in particular, but of course he was not alone, and he had a number of top managers that he could bring with him to make this acquisition or merger with Nissan a success. This need for a talent pool is also exacerbated and reinforced with the attrition that you will see and the high attrition rate you will see during merger. There is something that is commonly known, that a merger has a strong risk of attrition, and we are seeing that in this graph that was published by the Harvard Business Review a few years ago. And we see that at the day of the acquisition and for the first year of the acquisition, a very, very huge attrition rate is hitting the company. And on executive level, it's 1/4, 1/3 of the executives that are leaving. But something that is not always totally fully analyzed is what happens the following years. The company remains with a high attrition rate. In average, it's twice the number or the rate of attrition of a company that had not gone through an M&A process. And so you don't need really on the long term to have an engine for building talents, bringing them on board, replacing the ones that are leaving, and having the resources you will need into this merger. Otherwise, you might survive the 2-3 first year, but then really be challenged in the other ones. Now, just to add one more thing into the equation, the culture or the values of your company will have a strong impact. It's an area or something that can be both a point of attention, but also a way of succeeding and merging properly the different elements of the company. And that's something I've seen many times, and with many examples on that. At this stage, I will stop once again for another question and to see what would be your feedback on what do you think, and it deals with the role of the integration team in this case. When do you think the integration team should start being involved in the deal preparation? So A, B, C, or D? The culture is something that is usually widely recognized, and the way it is approached, in many cases, in the discussion I had, was exactly the way people answered to the same conference I was mentioning a little bit earlier, when they were asked about culture, is could we do better? And the answer is always yes, we could do better, by a vast majority. Now I found that it was not necessarily helping a lot just to say we could do better. And the question I was worrying and puzzled seeing the different meeting I had was to see that the same ratios were always coming, and people saying, yeah, we need more on culture, and very few were saying we have done or with measures. So what I would like is just share a few things here, very practical on it, is first to understand what is values and company's culture. So I will not go too deep into that, but the culture is very much linked to values, norms, systems, symbols, language. And that's the usual definition of what a company culture is. What is interesting in that is that those values, those norms, those habits can be measured. And I think if there is one takeaway from the few slides I will go through in terms of culture and what I've learned in my career, is that cultures, that is something, a word that has a wide sense, can be also be reduced to a number of very practical norms or elements that you can measure during the on your company before, during, and after the acquisition process. One model that I've seen, and it's just an example fitting our effort, very shown to me a few months ago during one of the exchanges we had with our partner in Belgium. In Global PMI Partners organized a debate in Ghent about the merger and M&A integration. And we had a presentation, very short, of a gentleman, a CEO of Container, that mentioned how he used a particular process for addressing this cultural topic through the acquisition he made in different parts of the world and different continents. And the purpose of this is to exchange with you and share something that I thought at that time very inspiring and very much measurable in terms of process. Here, the idea is to get to the value level of the culture of a company, and with very practical attributes. And you can see on the right side what would be those attributes. Typically, the process of the idea is to ask to people in the company to answer to a questionnaire. And like many of these surveys, to get a picture of the company at a certain point of time. The question then helps going to a certain vision or idea of what the company is. And this helps then managing the company, but also measuring the other companies that you acquire and go into it. So you can see very simple thing, that what is the accountability, loyalty, shareholder value, what is important for your company, what are important for the important attributes for your different employees in the company. So typically here you would see two companies, one company A and company B, with very different patterns or mapping of their cultural values. This would be an outcome of this type of questionnaires or exchanges with the employees. And you can see on the left side a company where people would be very much oriented to customer satisfaction, making difference, employee fulfillment. So more on the top part of the or the upper parts of the schematics. And on the right side, you can see a company that is more into operation, information, short-term focus, result orientation. So more on the basics of the company. That's here another example where you see the idea of this approach, and where basically from bottom to top, you come from very initial needs like stability, capability of creating value, having a good business model, and then going into a number of other values in terms of transformation, then cohesion, and when you go to the top, you go into the number of areas that we, for instance, we have in the corporate social responsibility, sharing with others, etc. And having those very practical evaluation or distinction of the values of the company, here tradition, diversity, control, goal experimentation, in this particular example, are helping you to understand what the company values are. Those values are not positive or negative. Tradition is not necessarily something negative. Tradition, it's a good thing. Or if you work for Hermes in fashion and building and making scarf for Harley Davidson, doing big size engine motorbikes. You are in the tradition, and that's good. And that's something important in your approach. So not positive, not negative, but the important thing is that you can measure it. I will not go too much in details into that, and I'm just going to one graph. So just to show that it is something you can measure. You can measure the engagement through those values of the employees. You can measure the way they work together, or the entropy. That means what is making their co-working difficult on time. The purpose of this section today is not to make a full presentation of this methodology, because I would absolutely not be qualified for that, but just to show that on this particular thing, that's a topic that is usually a little bit fuzzy in some of the presentations, we can be very practical, and we can have very practical processes in doing the integration of a company, understanding the two companies, seeing what the distance between the two companies, engaging the communication on how the two companies can have a similar level of, well, first a good level of understanding of each other, and what a distance are separating the two parts of the new company in order to shorten the gap in the future. That's one of many models, but the point is you need a model. You need a model, you need a way of getting back to trackable and measurable ways of understanding the culture evolution in your company. I will go through one or two successful cases. We are very often in merger talking about the merger that didn't work, but fortunately many of them are working. I researched a little bit the one that were obviously or advertising on their success due to human resources management. And I have a few ones. Here is one. Well, two first in the US, GSC Logistics. It's a company doing well, precisely logistics. They acquired another company in the West Coast in 2011. Their ideas and their strategic intent was to enlarge their footprint. It happens that the company they acquired was very reasonable in size, and their management resources were not distracted. Very important thing. Do you have the resources to go after an acquisition? The CPP Mavericks company, it's a company that is providing well, you might know the Mavericks analysis process, and that is the company doing this process. They acquired their distributor in Australia in 2007, and the idea was to grow into the value chain, to be more in control of the final customers. They considered that their acquisition was a success because the culture were very much compatible one to each other, very much oriented to empathy, to understanding customers, to people, and that's the way they interpret their success. Adidas acquired in 2005 Reebok, and the two companies seems to work well, keeping their brand. Here is a different view of the of cultures and values, and the two companies have considered from very beginning that their values were very close. They are both in sports, and probably it helps, and they are going into the different things that a company going into sports and branding are, and they could understand each other. GSW, it's an Indian company. It's a conglomerate that diversified, acquiring a number of companies in the steel industry, e-commerce, energy. And it was interesting to see that they have communicated a lot about building a talent pool for their acquisitions and for their growth. They are really focusing on getting young mid-manager, and one of their announcements was to increase one day to another young mid-manager by 30%, well, to increase their salaries by 30% to keep them on board. I will put here one more question. I think that's the last question of our session today. What do you see posing the most challenges to integration? In your experience, would it be people, culture? Would it be systems and processes? Combining go-to-market strategies, geographical or legal issues, or maybe others? I'll let you a few seconds on that. So integration doesn't necessarily start the day the deal is closed, but it should probably start a little bit earlier. Here we have a very recent example of the merger that was announced this month in October 2018 between two defense companies in the US, Harris and L3 Technologies, that announced their projects of merging. And what is interesting is to see there are some extracts here of the press release about the elements that were for them important to mention at the time of the announcement. And we can see that in this announcement, you are seeing the elements on the strategy, on the strategic intent, on the value creation, but also on culture and governance. And they are doing both those two topics that were topics that we're trying to cover today in this presentation. Is shared culture. They consider that the cultural aspects of the two companies of merger will be covered because the culture are very close in terms of culture of innovation and operating philosophy. Might be right or wrong, but at least that's their feeling, and they want to talk about it, they want to communicate about it. And for the governance, you can see on the bottom of the slide that they have already decided who will be in charge of the company for the 3 or 4 coming years. So one person for the 2 first years, the current chairman of one of the company, and from the 3rd year, the current chairman of the other company will take the lead. I think that's an important way of communicating. From this communication announcement, so even before this deal is closed, it's not closed yet, from what I understand, the two companies already communicated on who will manage and why they think the two companies are working well together. At this point, I would like maybe to wrap up a little bit and to put what we have seen in perspectives in terms of time or an organization, because we are seeing things that are very different one to the other in terms of human resources department, in terms of talent resources and talent pool, and the question of culture and values. I think would be the 3 blocks you will have to address during a merger or preparing a merger. And you will have similarly 3 times or 3 horizons of time in your acquisition or merger. You have the time before, you have the time during, and you have the time after. So before would be all what we call preparation or preparedness. That's precisely the topic of this exchange today. But it's good to see what follows and why you are preparing that. When you talk about preparing, have to prepare, obviously, your HR department. You need to have experienced manager. You need basically experience on organization. On talent resources, you need to have already a policy for managing a talent pipe. And for culture and values, you have to know much before the merger already what your company's values are, but also to build a model so that you can measure it and potentially use it during a further integration or the life of your company starting ahead. When you go and having two other horizons in mind, I mean, horizon when you merge and the future will help you, of course, shaping those three cylinders. When you will merge, that's the HR department will obviously need to have an HR department in the acquired company. You have to onboard, and you have the normal task that an HR department will do, but you have to be prepared before, of course. Where we have seen that in terms of talent, you will have to make quick decisions of top management and organization. And in terms of values and culture, you have to start immediately measuring. That's really the first thing, and to understand the differences between your company and the other companies. And if you have a model, you can start measuring and leading the new culture of the company. On the longer term, what you will obviously like to do is to go through a constant improvement of your organization, especially if you are in an area of regular acquisition, or if you are helping companies that are regularly acquiring, you will need to enrich those three blocks into the getting the strong tools and engines you will need for the future. So at this point, I would like just to sum up a few things, a few learnings that we have seen today, and it will be very simple. What we want into what would be the very first advice in terms of human resources is to do things quick. And that's why you need to be prepared. If you had plenty of time, then you could do on the spot and do what things. But the main risk is to see the middle management, the top executives, and the whole company not being able to start from day one because of uncertainty. And on the things that you have to do quick is to decide on the top executives, to fix the middle management, to really understand who are the key people and keep them on board with the right messages, to determine the things quickly. I'm emphasizing, putting a lot on doing it quickly, but that's something I've seen many times in companies being acquired. The messages were lagging, and at the end, people were saying, why didn't you do it at the beginning? We were just expecting, we didn't know what was happening. And that's a big risk. And you have one way of doing it is to grow on the company culture side. Having a model for values will help you dramatically into going into this journey, and of course prepare for the next acquisition. In terms of all those quick things, basically will be risky only if you don't do it quick. At this point, I would like maybe to hand over to Richard on these elements. I think we would like to just bring the top of this presentation. Richard, can I leave it to you?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Philippe. Excellent presentation. I wanted to, very quickly invite you to learn a bit more about MergerWare. If we go to our next slide, MergerWare is a tool that can help facilitate many of the elements that we talked about today. On our next slide, you can see that it's a unified digital platform that really empowers you to do your workflow more efficiently and more effectively, utilizing digital technology, centralizing your information, and making overall management and having a view of what's happening much more easy. Additionally, you can define your projects, allowing you to reduce your risk, ensuring synergy, and you can do it all on one platform. As you can see, we have a number of key benefits regarding security, control, etc. And we cut across various elements of the deal, pre-deal, during, and post. And finally, next slide, Philippe. We want to note that there are a number of critical reports that will help you manage your activities. And again, I would like to invite you to learn more about MergerWare. Please visit our website. At this point, let's turn over to the Q&A section. Philippe, we've had a few questions come in. Okay.
Thank you, Richard.
Do you want me to read the questions for you?
Yes, if you can. I'm reading.
One question we had that came in is that if cultures are different, do you avoid the acquisition? And if not, what do you have to do up front to ensure success?
Well, I have seen, and the example of Renault-Nissan is a very good example of very, very, very different cultures. On one side, a semi-public or semi-state company of France merging or having a very strong investment and size with a Japanese private company or public company that we say it was quoted on board. No, I don't think well, of course, that's a question you should ask to yourself. You should ask whether what you understand of the differences of culture. I have been working for activities that were really international and bringing people of very different cultures. And I think sometimes it even helps to have people that are very different in cultures and that know that they are different. And that's something that seems a little bit paradoxal, but knowing that the other is very different and preparing for it is maybe sometimes easier than having somebody that you think is close and that at the end is maybe not that close. It's not because you share the same language than a company of another country that you share the same values. So probably not. I think it's really a matter of preparing it before.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes. So you talked a lot about larger organizations. The question came in that do you think the integration in areas and their top priorities apply to the M&A at startup companies? So does company size matter?
Well, obviously, if you are a large company, we are talking of a talent pool. Building a talent pool in one of the Fortune 500 is not the same thing as building a talent pool in a company in a medium-sized or small-sized company. But you really need in all those key elements we see. I think the three blocks we saw and the three horizons will be the same, whatever the size of the company is. I am currently running a medium-sized company that is based in Europe and Africa. And we made an acquisition during this summer of a small-sized company. And we are running through exactly the same blocks into it. Of course, your answer will be practically maybe a little bit different. You will, but you will have the same question of what about the top management? What about the culture? How to bring people on board? So I would say that the blocks are the same. The answer will be your answer, and there is not one definite answer that fits all minutes, I guess.
Right, that makes sense. Yes, sticking with this general theme, another question that came in has to do with, you talked a little bit earlier about executive turnover, right? Which I guess is expected at the time of the announcement after the transition period. The question is do you have any data or thoughts on non-executive staff attrition?
Yes, it's I will make just one remark on that. Yes, I think we are referring to the graph when we were seeing that the executive turnover was really going very high in 2 first years. The important thing on the slide, and that was a bit unexpected when I discovered this slide a few years ago, was that it still remains very high even the following years. We could expect that the executive turnover would be very high for a period of 1, 2, 3 years, and then stabilize with a new executive team, and that's not the case. So it still continues. What we are seeing with the non-executive staff attrition is less obvious. The experience in companies is really different from one company to another, and that's probably where also the culture, the country's culture are impacting the most in the environments. Essentially, yes, we are still seeing as the executive have a huge turnover. We are seeing also a huge turnover in the people that are below them. The reason is that people are, in fact, joining a company, but they are very often also joining somebody that's joining. They have been recruited by somebody, and when the executive are in turnover, all the middle management, and that's the one important, we'll see also a huge turnover, or might be tempted to join an ex-executive that is going somewhere. And that's sometimes, that's very often something that you see. So I would say, essentially, what we are seeing in terms of turnover for the executive is approximately the same for the middle management itself. Then, well, the plant floor is a little bit different, of course. But those key people that are in the middle management will be affected as well by the merger.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. So I have one last question has come in before we wrap up. And if you can talk about instances where you've seen a merger that was not successful because of HR challenges, and if you can talk a little bit about what those challenges were that led to that failure.
Yes. Well, in fact, we have seen many. So let's take one example. Still staying with Renault, we were talking about Renault and Nissan. In fact, when Renault and Nissan adventure started, the Renault was just splitting and parting with another car manufacturer, Volvo, and they had attempted 5 years before to merge Renault with Volvo, company for Nordics countries, very different culture. It never worked. And in this aspect, the culture was a very important aspect. The two companies were working differently. They had different ways of understanding the hierarchy, and they didn't realize of those differences before the deal was announced. And that's typically what I was mentioning when saying that companies that have the feeling that they are close in terms of culture, because in this case they were manufacturing cars in the same continent, at the end were not that close and had difficulties. They faced huge challenges. The middle management was in this case either leaving or being really hostile to the new management. And that's probably the two things that you have to worry. Either the middle management would be leaving the company. It could happen. They could follow an executive. Or and we have another example for a company that's a company like Schneider Electric Boat in the Middle East, where the attrition rate was just tremendous, to the point that no part of the value of the company was disappearing before action was taken. And the other thing is to see people becoming hostile to the new company. What would be and very often the question of the hesitation of seeing the or deciding on the top management is an issue. It's a tremendous effort to develop, to have the proper talent pool so that you can bring, if necessary, new heads of the divisions of the companies you are acquiring. It's something if you cannot improvise, it has to be in partially in the DNA of your company. And if you don't have it, then you are keeping the existing team on board, which is creating some uncertainty. We have seen that in a number of deals in the UTC or some other companies that have seen the value of the company they had acquired slightly changing simply because the person that was on board was very knowledgeable, had grown the company and made it a success globally. But being integrated in a larger company, his message was partly irrelevant. And that's what we have seen also in some acquisition that Microsoft made in the industry, in the IT industry. Well, it would be a good thing to make. I'm always looking more for positive examples. You're right, than negative ones. It's not often that the companies are communicating on HR issues having created a failure in the integration, and it's not necessarily the one people are like to share in the outcome of the merger.
Of course. All right. Well, thank you very much. We've come to the top of the hour, the bottom of the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank our attendees for joining us, spending their time with us. I'd like to thank Philippe for sharing his expertise and vast experience with us. And that will be the end of our webinar. We will distribute the electronic version after this call. And thank you very much for your time. Have a great day and great evening.
Thank you very much for. Thank you, Richard.